Hi, my name is Eric D. Goodman. I'm author of a new children's book called Flightless Goose. Flightless Goose is a story based on a real goose who had an accident and was no longer able to fly. He was left behind for the winter, and he had to learn to cope with his problems and to focus on his strengths. And because he was able to focus on his strengths, he was able to show his worth to the other geese when they came back after the winter. I hope you enjoy the book, and happy reading. The book is about a goose named Gilbert who's no longer able to fly after an accident, and so he has to learn to focus on his positive strengths, and he ends up saving the day at the end. The main message I'd like children to receive from the book is to treat other children and other people with dignity and respect, and just because somebody's different or maybe has an issue that other children or people don't have, that doesn't mean they can't contribute and they're not able to make it. Just that I hope children enjoy the book, and I hope they get something from it as far as learning about dealing with other children and how to keep at things even when they seem hard. Well, I learned early on that I wanted to be an author. I was actually in the 3rd grade when I had an assignment in English class. It was around Halloween, and we had to write a story about some kind of scary story, like a ghost story. And our assignment was to write a 3-page story, and I ended up writing about 10 pages. And the reaction from my friends and the teacher was really encouraging, and that's really when the seed was planted. And I've known ever since then that writing was my calling. A lot of people say you should sit down every single day and write, and I do consider that I write all the time. I'm constantly, thinking about writing, but I don't actually sit down every single day and make myself write. I tend to write in spurts, but I have been actively writing since the 3rd grade. Every year, I produce several things, and I'm always going back and revisiting it and revising it. As far as early influences for the children's book, I really enjoyed the books of Dr. Seuss and Eric Carle, and I liked like Where the Wild Things Are and a lot of different books, but those were probably ones that stand out and kind of stick with me. Those are the ones I'm reading to my children now. It's hard to pinpoint because it would depend on my mood, but I would say some of my favorites, actually The Giving Tree was one that I really liked. Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham, Fox and Socks by Dr. Seuss, The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. So it would be hard to say which one was the ultimate favorite, but those were all favorites. My most recent book that I actually have been trying to promote most recently is called Tracks, and that is a novel in stories. So each story in the book stands alone as an individual story, but they intertwine. That's currently with an agent in New York, and they're shopping it around trying to get a publisher. It took years to get an agent for it, so that in itself was a big accomplishment. But it's been with the agent for almost a year now, and fingers are crossed there. But about half the stories from Tracks have been published in literary journals and publications. So that's the main thing. I'm also currently revising a novel that I wrote called Womb, which is kind of an interesting premise. It's from the point of view of a child who hasn't been born yet, and the child narrates his own life as he narrates his mother's life, which he's witnessing through her. So that's another project I'm working on. I think for me, most of my writing starts with just an idea. It might be like a philosophical theme, or it might just be something that I witnessed or a thought that popped into my head. And I think the writing really starts before you start putting pen to paper. I might have this idea in my head for weeks or months, and it sort of develops before I ever sit down to write it. And then that's how the creative process starts. And then I tend to usually write a first draft pretty quickly. whether it's a story or a book. And then the long, grueling part is the revisions, and that I tend to put things away after I've written them for at least a year before I go back to revise them, so that I have a little bit of distance. And the rewrites can take years sometimes. With Tracks, I probably spent off and on about 2.5 years rewriting it, and I spent about 2 months writing the original draft. It's kind of a mixed bag right now. It's very hard to find a traditional publisher who is going to really promote the book and get it to sell. Anyone can get published through self-publishing now. Print on demand has made that very easy. So it depends on what your goal is. To get published by a traditional publishing house is very difficult. I think the last statistic I saw was 1 book out of every 30,000 submitted is accepted for publication. So that's 29,000 that are rejected. So the odds are really bad, really against you. You have to love writing to be doing it. On the other hand, if you really just want to write something for yourself and for your family and for certain people or a certain group of people, if you have a niche market, then you can self-publish through a print-on-demand publisher like Lulu.com or Booklocker.com or something like that. And that makes it very easy to get published now. So, believe it or not, the Flightless Goose is actually based on a real goose. So it's based on a true story. The premise is, I used to live in an apartment overlooking a lake, and so my desk was right up against this picture window, so I always had this nice view of the lake, and there were Canada geese there most of the year. And one year, a goose really did get hit by a car, and it wasn't able to fly, and it recovered, but it never was able to fly again. So when the geese left for the winter, this goose was left behind, and it survived because the neighbors and the people in the neighborhood fed it and kept it going. And when the geese came back, the geese accepted them back into the flock. So it was just an inspiring story, I thought, and a great way to kind of give a message of tolerance and accepting people that are different and dealing with disabilities as well. The actual first draft probably just took a few days to write. I mean, it was something that had been in my mind probably for a year or so, and I wasn't sure if it would end up being a young adult book or maybe just a poem or a short story. But the idea was there for probably a good year. The actual writing, a few days. But when my wife started illustrating it, as that process went on, it took a couple years for her to finish all the illustrations. So I would continuously pull it out and tinker with it and change it, and sometimes her illustrations would give me ideas for things to change as well. So the rewrites probably took a good 3 years or so, off and on. It wasn't like everyday work. It was maybe every few months I might pull it out and tinker with it. But from start to finish, from the first word on paper to being a book on a bookshelf, probably about 10 years. Yes. I mean, we kind of discussed the idea together before I wrote it, so she had a large part in the story. And then as she did the illustrations, what she did affected changes I made to the story as well. And what I wrote obviously affected what she was going to illustrate. So yes, there was a lot of back and forth, and it was a great process. The first piece of fiction that I published was recently, actually. It was probably around 2004, 2005 maybe, and that was a story in the Baltimore Review, and that was a work of fiction, a short story. That took, actually, ironically, it only took me a short amount of time to write that piece. There's other pieces I've spent years on, and I keep getting rejections on. But that piece, it just kind of flowed through me, and it got published almost right away.